We're going to talk about difference notation for intervals. That's a way of talking about a window on the graph from x equals something to x equals something else in a slightly different way. We've talked about it so far, considering a starting point, usually a, so in this case a might equal -2, all the way up until an ending point. B might equal +3 in this situation. And we would write that interval like this, from -2 to 3. But there is another way of writing it that renders the information slightly differently. So if this means go from -2 to +3, there's another important piece of information that is available but not yet explicitly visible. And that is the length of the interval. It matters how far from where you started to where you ended. And depending on what you're doing with your math, this may actually be far more useful information. So the way that we render that is with the variable x, sometimes a, but x is more common, representing our starting point. So in this case, x would be -2. And then we use another variable, either delta x or h, to represent the length of that interval. So in this case, if x was -2, then delta x, the change in x, was however far apart -2 is from 3. Well, you can kind of see it visually. You might even be able to think it in your head. From -2 to 3, that's 5 units apart. But if you need to do the math to get it explicitly, go ahead. It's just going to be final minus initial. So final minus initial is 3 minus -2. Negative times a negative is a positive, which means it's going to be 3 plus 2, which is 5. And that is clearly what we see up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. So this renders the information slightly differently. We can put it as an interval from -2 to 3, or we can put it in difference notation. X is -2, and the change in x is 5, so we're going to go from -2 5 units over. Depending on what you're doing, this may actually be far more useful. Let's practice, just make sure that you're on the same page with me. For this one right here, if we're going from 4 to 10, then x is equal to 4, our starting point is 4, and delta x is equal to 6, because from 4 to 10 is 6 units, or explicitly, 10 minus 4 is 6. The same thing is going to be true here. I'm going to use h notation. It's the exact same thing. You just need to be able to recognize both. So in this case, x is equal to 3, and instead of delta x, I'm using h to represent the change in x. And h, these are actually super close together. H is going to be 0.001. That's a tiny interval. Last but not least, in this case, x is equal to -10. Well, from -10, which would be like way over here, to -7, that's 3 units moving to the right. So even though it was two negative numbers, h is going to be equal to a +3, which again makes sense. -7 minus a -10 would be -7 plus 10, which would be 3. So whether you want to do it explicitly by listing out the subtraction every time, final minus initial, or if you want to do it in your head and just think, how far apart is 3 from 3.001? They're both acceptable ways of figuring out what the interval would look like if it were written in difference notation. That's it.